When people talk about arms designers, they don't usually think about any African country's designs. And when they usually think about them, they just think of a T-55 and some African warlord who, if they have extra time, money, and child soldiers, maybe they could afford a T-72 and a gold-plated AK. So, let's talk about South Africa. This country produced its own vehicles and they were some of the best in the world. And this video is going to be an overview and also an introduction to South African designs. But just before we start this, so referring to the last video, well, you see, I started it with Jägermeister, and this video is going to be slightly different because I am going to start it with Żubrówka. Fancy, I know. So, South Africa, the home of the corrupt politician called Cupcake. And if you know why he's called Cupcake, give me a like and comment please guys. Very often on this channel I have to research Russian things and I'm unable to do it sober, so I need your support. Back to the main topic. Guys, I write my scripts on Google Docs and it just says this. What the fuck am I supposed to do with this? Anyway, so I think that the Rattle is a good starting point. It could have a 90mm gun, a 20mm autocannon, 60mm mortar, or a 120mm mortar. She could accept many sizes, just like your masa. This is a family-friendly Christian music channel, by the way. The Rattle. It is a South African IFV. The army wanted something that has maximum firepower and maximum strategic mobility, so it could operate over large distances. Some guy named Johan probably said, "Yeah, cool APC you have there, but can it reach Angola?" Well, if no, then this design can footsack out of here. Now let's talk about the protection of the Rattle. It can withstand MG fire at the sides and some HMG fire from a 50 cal at the front, but not really to 14.5mm and 23mm guns. When the Rattle would run over a mine, the wheel would get blown off completely, meaning almost all of the force of the explosion would be transferred onto it, keeping the rest of the vehicle and the crew safe. Now let's discuss the armaments a bit further. The 20mm autocannon, it was a French licensed design of a French Gat gun capable of wrecking the BTR series of vehicles that SWAPO use. To those who don't know what SWAPO was, well, communist rebels backed by Soviets and Cubans. They used BTR-152, BTR-60, BMP-1 and 2, and the armor of those APCs and IFVs would protect you frontally from 12.7mm ball ammo, so the 20mm had no issue. Also, the 20mm could be used to take down low-flying helicopters. Now the Milan ATGM, it could penetrate 350mm of RHA, making it capable of easily engaging the T-34 and the T-55 that the communists would use. Now the 90mm. It was a licensed production of another French Gat. Some guy named Jacobus probably said, "You see that eland there? The vehicle, not the antelope, you mampara." We take the turret off and we shove it onto a Rattle. As I said before, she can take many sizes. The 90mm. Now let's compare it to the BMP-1's 73mm Grom. The 90mm didn't have an autoloader so bad that when the crews would get it, they would immediately blowtorch it off. Also, the turret of the Rattle and Eland was a 2-man turret instead of a 1-man turret. What are we, post-World War I France to have a 1-man turret? Also, the 90mm wasn't famous for being inaccurate like the 73mm Grom. Now the troop carrying capability of it. It carried 9 dudes. Although the BTR-60 was made to have 14 staffed Russian farmers, the troop exits of the BTR-60 were inferior. Well, in the BTR video, I talked about the side exits being retarded. Well, hear me out. The South Africans actually made it work on the Rattle, as the side hatches opened in a way that would give protection from small arms fire. Also, they were comfortable to actually use and safe for the user. The Rattle, just like the BTR, had the engine at the back. However, it still had a rear exit and top exit. Now let's look at the BTR exits. See Russia? It is possible to have an engine at the back and still have a normal troop exit at the back as well. Now the mobility, which was one of the key features of the Rattle. When it was being designed, it could go 105 kilometers on the road with good wind, and if the mechanic got drunk and felt like it, he could go up to 140. But then any turn would flip it over. The operational range of this beast was able to traverse 1,000 kilometers of the savannah, and it weighed 18.5 tons. Also, it would break through thick African bush, and because of this, it had a sharp hull front, just so to drive right into the bush and not care. Here is a photo of the conditions in which they would fight, which is very difficult for many vehicles. The eland would struggle sometimes and bog down in those bad conditions. The Rattle would have the same armaments and larger operational range and the ability to carry troops and go through that terrain with no issue. No hate on the eland, it is still cool, but the Rattle is just better. I'm not gonna mention the mortar versions of it as I just find them boring, so now conclusion of the Rattle. An 18-ton IFV which could take down MBTs like a T-55. It could cross some of the harshest terrain, and it's proven itself to be more than capable and to be very adaptable, which is why it deserves a lot more attention. When people think of Cold War era APCs and IFVs, the Rattle almost never gets attention. People usually think about the BMP, Marder, or other Warsaw Pact IFV or APCs. And the Rattle deserves just as much, if not more love. When you have terrain where an MBT can't get to, you better hope a Rattle comes and saves your ass. Just like the animal it was named after, the honey badger, it took on animals way heavier than it, and it would not only hold its own, but also win. Lately, many people were impressed how the Ukrainian Bradley pushed up the T-90's shit. Now let's remember that the first to screw a communist MBT's ass was the Rattle, and the Rattle was the first to look at the MBT and say, "Nah, I'd win." Imagine the Italian Centauro, or the French AMX 10RC. Imagine they had a South African cousin, who looks sexier and cooler. Okay, how did this beauty come to existence? Well, let's start with the eland. For counterinsurgencies and things like that, it was fine in the South African border war. However, as Namibia became part of the conflict, and just like the Rattle, South Africa needed something which could operate far away from thin supply lines for hundreds of kilometers. And with a full fuel tank, it could go 1,000 kilometers. You see, the eland would get stuck and need a lot of logistical support. Way more than a Rattle, so the firepower asset wouldn't come along with the Rattle at times. Also, it eventually became insufficient against some of the T-55s. And as the Cubans and others were getting more involved, South Africa deployed the Olifants. However, this tracked monster couldn't keep up with the Rattle, so what they basically needed is something on wheels, with speed and large operational range, and better firepower than an eland. And that's how she was created. It could operate on long distance raid, far away from the supplies, with speed and reliability. In the savannah, you see, tracks need a lot of maintenance, and thanks to wheels, it's basically immune to that issue. Also, if it hit a landmine, it could pop off, and you can just put a new wheel on, just like the Rattle. And if the Olifant would hit a mine, it would take a few hours before being back to normal. However, when serial production started, the border war was over. Today, South Africa has about 240 of them, armed with a 76mm gun, capable of cracking open a T-62 open like a can of beer after a hard day of bashing communists. This gun is a licensed production version of an Italian naval gun with the same caliber. It's the same gun that's also on the automatic, but without an autoloader. Also, thanks to its caliber, it can carry more rounds than, for example, the 105mm gun armed prototype for exports. But we can get to prototypes a bit later. So, the 76, it would fire only APFSDS and HE, and it was accurate to 2.5 kilometers. Some say that it could go to 3 kilometers and even 12 kilometers of range, but I have a few doubts about this. Also, a quick note from me, I think it would be cool if they developed a HESH or a heat round for it. So this wheeled tank destroyer, it can fire also on the move, and the gunner and commander can operate both the main gun. Also, it has a laser rangefinder and a digital fire control system. Many tanks in modern day are more advanced with third generation thermals and 120mm guns and can withstand ATGMs, but they require a metric shitload and a metric fuckload of logistical support. And a lot of those vehicles can end up like Russia in their 3-day military special operation with poor logistics. Meanwhile, this sneaky Wildcat can operate way further than any other vehicle. It will sneak up on you, take your lunch money, and it will become your stepdad by the time you even come home. It's the ultimate bitch slapper, and the armor can frontally take on 23mm cannon fire. With add-on protection, it can survive anti-tank mines like it's nothing. And in case the crew has to, it can go out by side hatches to lessen the chance of getting shot while exiting the top hatches. Also, it's got an engine smoke generator and a bunch of smoke grenades on the turret. Also, cool thing, on the road it uses a 4x8 drive, and off-road it uses 8x8, a feature that the Rattle also has, which can have 2x6, 4x6, and if you really have to, 6x6. The Roycat can go 120 kilometers on the road, but it's safer to just go 90. Also, it can inflate and deflate its tires, like a Rattle, to help increase the cross-country capability. And even if two tires on the same side are just completely off, it can still keep moving. This speedy hunter of the savannah is built for its terrain. It proves that you shouldn't try making the best vehicle in the world, but instead try making something purposefully built for your logistical support and your terrain. Now let's move away from land predators and move to flying ones, the Royvalk, a flying beauty and a combat beast. Now let's start with the Oryx, the flying one, not the animal. You have to be a really smart guy to name a helicopter after a land animal. Damn. But to be fair, in the Polish army we do have a boat named after a bird. The Oryx is a South African-built French Puma helicopter. South Africa needed something purposefully made for attack, just like USA had with the Black Hawk and Apache, a dedicated attacker and a dedicated transporter. So you don't end up with the issues the Soviets had with the Mi-24, where you either had guns and fuel and no men, or you had men without any way of supporting them much. Mi-24 helicopters were built to be able to have lots of rockets, ATGMs, and lots of ammo for a 12.7mm machine gun, and at the same time have lots of fuel and men in it. However, the designers were a bit drunk and didn't really get it that way, and an Mi-24 could either carry men or it could carry firepower. And because of this, if for example you had 4 of them, only 2 of them would carry men and 2 would be used for support, which made them only half as effective. So although a universal helicopter idea is cool, it's not really a doable thing. Back to the Royvalk. It would have to share many of its components like gearboxes, engines, main rotor and tail rotor, all of that to lessen the logistical burden, also to make it simpler and a bit easier to develop and produce, alongside with the Oryx. Also, one of the demands for the design was to make it up to US attack helicopter standards, which if you look at the AH-1, you could see some similarities. First, to prove the concept, they made an Alouette-based XH1 Alpha as a demo for this, and everyone was like, okay, I like this, and then they made an attacker version of the Oryx to see. And then the first rival prototype came to existence called XDM, and then later there was the ADM, which did some firing trials with the Makopa ATGM, which is a basically definitely not a Hellfire copy. Also, it was mostly made from aluminium alloy, it had self-sealing fuel tanks, and the cockpit had aircon. It also had an oxygen system for the pilots. The seats were optimized for crashes just in case. And look guys, I am a tank and jet autist, not a helicopter autist. But I know not all helis can do a loop, and when they can, it's super impressive as fuck. And the Royvalk can do a frickin' loop. Also, it has sand filters for deserts and savannas. This thing can operate in a sandstorm. And it can do 72 hours of combat missions with no maintenance and refueling. Only rearming, and the rearming will only take 15 minutes. It even has a radar and laser rangefinder. The pilots had a screen to watch how they hit the targets. Also, the early ones had binoculars on the helmet, which I think is just a bit funny. Now the armament it carries, it would have a 20mm autocannon, same as the Rattle, and a few Makopas, which is basically just like a Hellfire. And it's a, as I said before, definitely not a Hellfire. And it could easily destroy any T-72 tank, even with ERA. In fact, what Russian tank actually does have a chance against the Hellfire though? And the 20mm is perfectly capable of wrecking BMP 1s and 2s, and any BTR series. But what if there is a flying target? Well, it can carry a Darter missile, a Magic 1, or just put a Mistral on it. This flying predator will detect you, outrange you, and then it will penetrate you. Okay, now back to the land. I am getting a bit of a fear of heights with all of this. So, let's talk about this herbivore with a massive armament. Not the elephant's tusk, but no, a massive horn. This beast, just as mighty as the vehicle that was named after it, the G6 Rhino. Oh god, I love that thing. Before the G6, the mobile artillery of the SADF was the Sexton, which is a regular howitzer just stuck on a Sherman. The now Land Systems decided to get the G5 gun and develop something new, as the Sexton was a bit outdated and they wanted something more mobile and with the same gun as the G5. So, in 1981, work started and production started in 1988, with the first 4 going into combat immediately and scoring some kills against some BMPs, as it found it offensive that this metal shitbox is on the same continent. And here is footage from the event. Futsak! Blyad! Also, the G6 was one time firing on an airbase, and as the MiG-21s were starting off the runway, the G6 round started hitting, and it scored 4 kills against them. Now that's one way to say stay the fuck down. Of the first 4 G6 Rhinos that were made, one suffered an engine failure, and after just 3 days, it went straight back into murdering the Kak 8 Ala 8. And now it's time to talk about the heaviest Swapo Bindabasha, also the heaviest beast of the South African arsenal. But before the story of this heavy beast even starts, let's go back to World War II. The Brits, after having some not so good designs, they decided to make up for it by making the greatest tank ever, the Centurion. One of the first 5 of them had a 20mm coax autocannon, and I'm saying this because I have a photo with it. It's the last remaining one of the OG first 5 prototypes. The Centurion was too late for any major World War II tank combat. However, its later versions like the Centurion Mark III, Mark V were exported around the world, and they had major success. like the Aussie Centurion 5-1 Iraq, which was pretty good in Vietnam, the Shot Kal, which saw a lot of success in the Israeli Defense Force. And now let's talk about the South African spin off. So, South Africa bought some Centurions from the Brits, and they wanted to buy some more. However, there was an arms embargo right after that, and that was caused by the apartheid regime. But South Africa needed some tanks, so what they did is they made a Centurion at home, but better. Also, South Africa bought some through Jordan and India, sometimes without turrets and sometimes without guns, to go around the arms embargo. Okay, that's pretty smart. And just like many users of the Centurion, they realized that the mobility is shit. So what they did is what Israel did with their Centurion, which is new engine and new transmission. They gave her a new engine and transmission, as in the South African climate, the old ones would overheat. They also gave her a new gun, as many of the Centurions had 20-pounders. So basically they just gave her some blue pills and... Wait a sec, that's the goal, right? Right? But okay, the gun was a 105mm M68 gun, which was practically almost the same as the L7. And it would fire the same ammo anyway, so who cares? They would often use the Israeli manufactured M111 APFSDS, which had 390mm of penetration at point blank, and 150mm at 2 kilometers against a 60-degree plate, making it perfectly capable of wrecking a T-55. There was also a heater fest, and also a HESH round, and also a smoke round, making it very versatile in many situations. Also, the South Africans made sure that 80% of the Olifant could be produced in South Africa, and they also redid the entire fire control system. The Mark 1A is almost indistinguishable from a regular Centurion, apart from the fact that it doesn't wear side skirts. Also, the engine deck is slightly raised for the bigger engine. And there was also the Mark II, which had panoramic sight, 3rd gen thermals, and pretty advanced even till this day, and add-on armor composed of NERA elements, which is just a different way of saying composite armor. It could protect you from a T-62 Heat FS round, and it could fire DM-63 APFSDS, which Taiwanese claim has 600mm of penetration, making it more than capable of wrecking a T-72A or M. And she is the face of the SADF and the pride of an entire nation. Although it is not entirely South African, we can look past that. Now let's look at the Abrams. It has a German gun, British armor, and the crew have Italian sidearms. Just like Poland made a T-72 into a PT-91 and just made it their own, South Africa did the same thing with the Centurion by turning it into an Olifant. Now let's talk about something men can actually carry. Well, you're gonna need 2 men for this one. And it's a bit of a chonker, the NTW-20. Well guys, I am a massive fan of anti-material rifles, as you're basically giving a man the capability to kill a vehicle. Just like Soviet anti-tank rifles, they were made to penetrate the sides of Panthers, or like the 150 cal that was made for wrecking helis. A 50 cal can be used to penetrate the side of a BMP or BTR as well, and many other vehicles. Well, here we have a 20mm. Similar to the Finnish Lahti, the 20mm cartridge was chosen not because of the velocity or the penetration or anything like that. The more caliber you have, the more stuff you can put inside. For example, if you have a HE round for a 12.7, or for the 20 will have more explosive packed into it. So back to the NTW-20, it can wreck a parked aircraft, telecommunication masts, power lines, missile sites, radars, refineries, satellite dishes, gun emplacements, bunkers, and personnel. That's just a long-range amputation. Peak South African medical technology. Now, it can fire HE, HE tracer, and semi-armor piercing HE. Also, it can change the barrel to a 14.5mm for better AP rounds. And there was also a version with a 20mm Hispano barrel. Yes, the famous 20mm Hispano. And to do all of those changes, all you had to do is change the barrel, bolt, and scope. So, you come to South Africa with ill intent, then be ready that some Johan in a rattle will appear behind you. Johannes in his speedy wildcat will flank you. Jacobus in a rhino will snipe you. And some flying drunk in a Rooivalk will happily launch a makopa at you. All this while getting sniped with a 20mm anti-material rifle. And if things get serious, someone will reactivate an Olifants and crush you under the might of the Savannah Arsenal. Just like with my Czech weapons video, I encourage you to learn about countries' arms development that aren't Russia, USA, or Germany, because they overshadow everyone a little bit too much, and we all heard about the Tiger, the Abrams, the T-Series. It's time for others to shine as well. So in the last video, I asked who would win, government drained pigeon drone or radioactive ninja bat. Well, this time it's gonna be cocaine shark versus radioactive ninja bat. However, to make it fair, the cocaine shark can breathe air and fly. So we've got flying, air breathing cocaine shark versus a radioactive ninja bat.